This video tutorial is compatible with Photoshop CC and Photoshop CS6. In this project we're going to reduce the depth of field in post-production. Here we've got the before image with the four people on the beach, well, plus a little leg here between the mother's legs, and we've got these two people in the waves. A little bit too much distracting detail, so what I've done is reduce the depth of field using some techniques which I'll outline in the project. And there we've got the focus resting now more clearly on the four people on the beach with the background out of focus now. So let's see how we can do this. We'll go back to the original start position and then click on the layers panel. Now in this project file, if you go to the paths panel, you'll find that I've created three paths that we can load and create selections from. I've got one for the parents, one for the older child and one for the younger child here. Okay, so we'll start this by clicking on the parents path, and then if I right click, we can choose the make selection. Now we can choose to apply a feather after when we've already got the selection, or we can apply the feather now. Here I'm going to choose a 0.5 pixel feather for this project and select OK. And then from the select menu I'm going to choose inverse. So we've got all of the background selected rather than the parents on the beach here. Okay, let's come over to the layers panel and we're going to add a new empty layer. And we're going to be using this layer to do some cloning. So I'm just going to double click on the name of this and rename it clone. And then click to one side to commit that name. Okay, let's take a zoom in here. I'm just going to use the Command spacebar keyboard shortcut on a Mac or Control spacebar on a PC just to zoom in around this area on the foreground here. Now we're going to choose the stamp tool, okay, over in the tools panel, or just press S on the keyboard. Okay, and we're going to increase the size of the brush. I'm going to use my close square bracket key just to the right of the letter P key on the keyboard, and we're also going to make sure that the hardness is set to 0% here. I'll just click in the options bar to collapse that panel. Holding down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, I'm just going to take a sample of the waves here crashing on the beach. And then after I've clicked, I'm going to move that sample over to this leg between the woman's legs. Okay, and click, and now I'm going to paint to replace that area like so. And that's a fairly seamless repair there. Now if I hold down the space bar, I can click and drag to a new location. We've got a couple of other areas that I want to replace here. We've got this guy swimming in the beach, in the wave, sorry. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the left on this top of the wave here, hold down the Option or Alt key and click just to select a source point for the clone stamp tool. And then we're going to move over, and I'll try and align the top of that wave with the wave that we've got here, and then click and drag and start painting to replace that. Now the selection is protecting the parents from any cloning that may appear over those. Okay, and again spacebar, click and drag to the right hand side of the image, and we've got a guy bodyboarding here that we're going to remove. So I'm just going to hold down the Option or Alt key again, select the crest of that wave breaking there, click to select the source point, move it over, align the top of the wave and click and paint to replace that information like so. And again another seamless repair there. I'll just do Command 0 or Control 0 to fit on screen there. And now we can set about creating our depth of field effect. Okay, I'm going to save this selection that I've got of the parents in the Channels panel. So let's come over to the and click on the Channels panel and then click on Save Selection as Channel. Okay, and we have an Alpha 1 channel here. I'm just going to double click to rename this, and I'm going to call it a depth of field dash map. Okay, because this is going to be my depth of field map, which will control the defocusing that we'll be using later. Okay, now I'm going to go to the select menu and choose deselect to lose that active selection. Now this will protect the parents from the lens blur we're going to be applying, but I need the defocus area to fade in gradually as we go through the background there. So in order to do this, I'm going to select the gradient tool from the tools panel, or press G on the keyboard. Now we're going to select a black-white gradient. That's the third one along. Okay, and we're going to select a mirror. Okay, here we've got the mirror option here, and once that is selected, it's the reflected gradient option, then we're going to select the multiply option here. Okay, and we're working at 100% opacity, and the reverse is not checked. I'm going to come to the base where the feet are touching the sand, and I'm going to click and drag vertically. We can hold the shift key as we drag, and this will constrain the gradient to a perfect vertical. And because it's the reflected option here, we get a tail off of that gradient both to the top and to the base of the starting point. Okay, and this will help me fade out the focus gradually. Okay, now let's start adding the children to this depth map that we're creating. So I'm going to come over to the paths panel here, and I'm going to click on the younger child there, and right click to make selection. And again we'll choose a 0.5 pixel radius. We could raise this a little bit higher if we got some very soft edges to this, so maybe I will actually raise this to a 1 pixel feather radius there before selecting OK. Okay, now we're going to fill this selection with a foreground color, and we're going to sample this color from where the selection is terminating here in this graduated reflected gradient that we've created. So I'm going to hold down the option key to create a sample, and then click just towards the base of that selection. This will be a dark grey rather than black. And then from the edit menu we're going to choose fill, and in the fill we're going to choose foreground color. This is the color that we've just sampled, and in the blending options I'm going to choose multiply before selecting OK. And then from the select menu we'll choose deselect. Okay, now we've added that younger child to the depth map. We'll set about adding the older child, so let's just click that path, right click to choose make selection, and again we'll choose that 1 pixel radius and choose OK. And again we're going to sample. This time it's going to be a little bit lighter because this older child is a little bit further away from the parents, so let's just sample that grey. It'll be a slightly lighter grey, and then edit, fill, and again foreground color with the blending set to multiply, and then select OK. And from the select menu choose deselect. And now this is the depth map that I would like to create. It is possible to extend the reflected gradient. I'll just select the reflected gradient option. We've still got the black white, still the multiply and reflected. We can drag another shorter gradient this time, perhaps halfway up the legs, holding down the shift key, and that just stretches out this gradient just a little bit more to cover the feet of these two children. Okay, now let's return to the layers panel, and I'll click on my clone layer, so we'll come out of that alpha channel view. And now we're going to do a stamp visible to stamp both the clone layer and the background layer onto a single layer. And I'm going to use the stamp visible keyboard shortcut for this. On a Mac that's Command, Option, Shift and E. On a PC that would be Control, Alt, Shift, E in order to create this stamp visible layer. I'll just double click that and rename it Stamp Visible, and then click to one side to commit that name. Okay, now we're ready to start dropping the depth of field, and to do this we're going to come up to the filter menu and come down to blur and choose lens blur. Okay, now in the lens blur dialog, what we need to do to select that depth map we created is select it from the depth map source here, depth of field map. Okay, and this is already now applying that defocus or lens blur just to the areas that are white on that depth map, and any areas that are black or grey are either protected or semi-protected from this lens blur filter. Okay, now we can control how much blur we want by using the radius slider. We can choose a lower amount or a higher amount. I'm going to go for 40, and we're also going to use a small amount of noise, and this will just add a little bit of texture back into the lens blur so that it doesn't look too artificial. And I'm choosing the uniform and monochromatic options here. If you do want to create some specular highlights here, then we can actually lower the threshold in specular highlights, and this will create some blowing out of highlights. It's creating quite an unpleasant effect in the sky, however, so I'm just going to raise that back to 255, and we'll leave the highlights as they are. And before we select OK. Okay, now that the lens blur has been applied, it's probably worth zooming in just to check the quality of the edges that we're working in. And again, I'm going to use the zoom keyboard shortcut, Command spacebar or Control spacebar on a PC, and we'll just click and drag over in order to zoom in on that area. Now if I zoom in another couple of times, you might find on some of the higher contrast edges, we're actually at 200% now, you might find some unsatisfactory edges that you might want to make a little bit softer or do some cloning work here. Okay, and in order to do that, I'm going to create an empty new layer. Just click on that new layer, create a new layer icon there, and we'll just double click to call this repair edges, like so. Now in order to protect the subject from any work that we do at the edge, we can actually just again load one of the paths. Here I'll just click on the parents and then right click to choose make selection, and again perhaps we'll choose a 1 pixel radius this time and select OK, and then we're going to inverse that selection so only the background is selected. Select inverse. Now in order to push this selection edge back away from the edge so we can actually work on the edge, we're going to need to come up to the select menu, modify, and expand. Now you might need to expand by 1 or 2 pixels. I'd probably choose 1, but I'm actually going to choose 2 in this instance just so you can see the edge being repaired more easily. Okay, and as you can see, that selection edge moves away from that edge, exposing some of the darker lines that we may want to remove or soften. Okay, now if the marching ants at the edge get a little bit distracting, we can come up to the view menu and just come down to show and hide those selection edges. Now it's very important that we remember we're selecting this option because it will prevent us doing certain things if we forget to switch this back on later, and that helps us remind us to deselect. Okay, so the selection is still active, it's just that we're hiding the selection edges. And now I could click on the clone stamp tool, and let's just reduce the size of the clone stamp tool here. I'm just using the open square bracket key, and then I'm just going to hold down the Alt or Option key to sample some of the pixels just to the left of the edge here, and we're going to come in and then paint with those pixels. And as you can see, we're actually just pushing that edge further back in here and hiding any perhaps dark unsightly edges that we may have created. And as I said, normally I would have just chosen 1 pixel, but you can see that edge being moved back a little bit more clearly with this 2 pixel edge maneuver here. And I'll just do a little bit more work up there just to soften that leg, and we'll stop there. I'll zoom back out, Command 0 or Control 0 to fit on screen, and come back to the Layers panel. Now we'll return to the View menu and go to Show and choose Selection Edges once again, because it is important that we lose this selection before proceeding. So I'll go to the Select menu and then choose Deselect. What I'm going to do now is I've just noticed there's a small curvature in the horizon line, a little bit of lens distortion which I'm not entirely happy with here. So I'm just going to do another stamp visible here, Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E on a PC, and we're just going to rename that Stamp and Warp. Okay, and I'm going to use this this stamped layer now to just do a little bit of warping just to straighten that horizon line. Okay, so let's get an idea of how crooked that horizon line is by bringing in the rulers. Okay, Command R on a Mac or Control R on a PC will bring in the rules, and then we just click and bring down, slide down until we put a rule just on the top of those waves, and we can see that it's probably just curling up a little bit on the left hand side. Let's just collapse that panel, and just ever so slightly on the right hand side as well. Okay, so the way we're going to control that is to come in with a free transform. That's Command T on a Mac or Control T on a PC, and we're not going to adjust this in the free transform option. We're going to come up here to the options bar and actually choose the warp mode. Okay, now we've got the warp mode applied. You'll see this 9 section grid here. We're going to just come right over to the corner here, just on the inside of the bounding box, and click and drag down slightly. Okay, just until we tuck that in behind that rule for guidance, and perhaps a little bit more on the left hand side. Okay, and just pulling that down, and if you need to, just pull it out slightly so we don't come into the image canvas area there. And now that I'm happy that that horizon line is straight, I'll just commit that by hitting the commit transform icon in the options bar. Okay, and if we would need to remove that rule now, just click on the move tool and click and drag it back to the rule from where it came from, and then Command R or Control R again in order to remove those rulers. Okay, let's open up the layers panel one last time. Okay, now I'm just going to put in some extra darkening both in the sky and also on the beach here to create some richer colors for this summer scene. So let's put these gradients in an empty new layer. Let's click on the create a new layer icon here, and we'll just rename this layer gradients and click to one side. Now let's select the gradient tool here, and in order to sample from the ocean, we're just going to hold down the option key. Okay, so give me the sampling eyedropper here, and we'll just click on some of this deep blue in the sea, and that's entered as the foreground color. Okay, now let's select the foreground to transparent option, second one in, and we'll select the linear gradient, and we're going to select just normal as the mode, and we've got 100%. What we will do, however, is set this gradient layer to the multiply blend mode for darkening. Let's just click into the sky and drag down towards the horizon line, again holding down the shift key to constrain this gradient to a perfect vertical, and let go, and in comes our summer sky with a nice fade off towards the horizon line. Okay, we can create a separate new layer for a second gradient, or we can simply add it to this gradient layer that we already have here. And again, holding down the option key to create a sample, I'm going to take a sample of some of this darker sand here. Okay, and then we could create either a linear gradient or a reflected gradient to put this color in over the top of the existing sand, and I'll go from halfway down and then go up to the feet here, holding down the shift key to constrain that, and that puts in some darker, deeper sand into that foreground, like so. Okay, and that sort of completes the project for where I'm going with this, and that completes the depth of field in post-production.